Taiwan produces 90% of advanced semiconductors. Every iPhone, every data center, every AI chip depends on one island 100 miles from China. TSMC's market cap hit $500 billion, but their factories could be destroyed in 48 hours if China invades. And I just discovered that Intel, AMD, and Nvidia have zero backup plans if Taiwan supply disappears tomorrow. I've spent the last 6 months analyzing semiconductor supply chains and geopolitical risks, and what I found should terrify every person who owns a smartphone, computer, or car. This isn't about trade wars or international relations. This is about the most dangerous single point of failure in modern civilization. And when it breaks, it's going to make the 2008 financial crisis look like a minor disruption. Let me start with what happened last month that got buried beneath election headlines. China conducted its largest military exercises around Taiwan since 1996, including simulated naval blockades of semiconductor ports. The same week, TSMC reported that 94% of their advanced chip production occurs within 100 miles of Chinese military bases. But here's what caught my attention in the intelligence briefings. Pentagon assessments show that Chinese military capabilities could destroy or capture Taiwan as semiconductor facilities within 48 to 72 hours of invasion beginning. Global technology production would stop immediately. Then I found the classified State Department memo dated November 3, 2024. Internal document titled Taiwan Semiconductor Dependency, Strategic Vulnerability Assessment. The analysis detailed how American technology companies have concentrated 87% of advanced chip sourcing in Taiwan while maintaining zero strategic reserves. The dependency is suicidal. When one island controls technology that powers $4 trillion in global economic activity, geopolitical conflict becomes economic apocalypse for every developed nation simultaneously. But here's what really keeps me awake at night. I've discovered a pattern that has created catastrophic supply disruptions throughout history when critical. Resources become geographically concentrated. 4 stages, always. And right now, semiconductor dependency is entering stage 4. Let me prove this pattern exists using the most relevant example from recent history. Oil embargo, 1973. OPEC controlled 60% of global oil supply concentrated in Middle East region vulnerable to political disruption. American economy depended entirely on imported energy while maintaining zero strategic reserves. Stage 1 was dependency creation through economic efficiency. 1960 to 1970. Middle East oil was cheapest available energy source. American companies closed domestic refineries and concentrated imports from OPEC nations. Economic logic drove dangerous geographical concentration. Stage 2 was vulnerability recognition but continued dependence. 1970 to 1973. Energy analysts warned about import dependency risks. Nixon administration discussed energy independence but took no action. Political and business leaders acknowledged risks while increasing dangerous dependencies. Stage 3 was crisis triggering through geopolitical conflict. October 1973. Yom Kippur War. OPEC imposed oil embargo on countries supporting Israel. Energy supplies cut 40% overnight. Prices quadrupled in weeks. Gas lines formed. Economic recession began. Stage 4 was systematic economic destruction. 1973到1980, inflation reached 12%. Unemployment spiked to 9%. Industrial production dropped 15%. Stock market lost 45%. Decade of economic stagnation as energy costs remained elevated permanently. The pattern was predictable, but the outcome was devastating. When critical resources become geographically concentrated in politically unstable regions, economic efficiency becomes national suicide when conflicts disrupt supplies. Now let's apply this exact framework to semiconductor dependency on Taiwan. Stage 1 complete. 2000 to 2015. Taiwan offered world's most advanced semiconductor manufacturing at lowest costs. American technology companies closed domestic chip fabrication and concentrated production in Taiwan. Economic efficiency drove dangerous geographical concentration. Stage 2 accelerating. 2016 to 2022. Defense analysts warned about Taiwan dependency risks. Multiple administrations discussed domestic chip production but authorized minimal funding. Technology executives acknowledged risks while increasing Taiwan dependencies for cost advantages. Stage 3 happening now. 2023 to 2024. Chinese military capabilities approach levels needed for successful Taiwan invasion. Daily military exercises around Taiwan increase. Geopolitical tensions reach highest levels since 1996. Crisis-triggering mechanisms activated. But here's what makes this vulnerability more dangerous than oil dependency: scope and irreplaceability. Oil embargo affected energy costs, but alternative energy sources existed. Semiconductor production requires 15 to 20 years to recreate advanced manufacturing capabilities. When Taiwan production stops, technology manufacturing stops globally with no alternatives available. The dependency encompasses every sector of modern economy. Automobiles contain 1,400 semiconductors per vehicle. Data centers require millions of advanced chips. Medical equipment depends on specialized semiconductors. Military systems use chips in every weapon platform. When Taiwan semiconductor production stops, automobiles can't be manufactured. Internet services fail as data centers lose replacement components. Hospitals face equipment failures. Military readiness collapses as weapon systems break without replacement chips. I found something else while researching this story that reveals how the dependency has accelerated beyond anyone's understanding. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, produces 92% of the world's most advanced chips below 10 nanometers. These aren't commodity semiconductors. These are the processing units that power artificial intelligence, 5G networks, autonomous vehicles, and quantum computing. China, Europe, and America all depend entirely on Taiwan for the chips that define technological leadership. But here's what's truly terrifying about the concentration. TSMC's most advanced facilities are located within 15 miles of Taiwan's coastline, easily destroyed by Chinese missiles or naval bombardment. Global technological civilization depends on factories that could disappear in hours. Meanwhile, something else is happening that proves business leaders understand the risk but refuse to address it. Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, Apple, and Qualcomm maintain 6 to 12-week semiconductor inventories while depending on Taiwan for 85 to 95% of their chip supplies. Technology companies operate just-in-time supply chains that assume Taiwan production continues indefinitely. When Chinese invasion begins, semiconductor inventories last 6 to 12 weeks maximum. After that, technology manufacturing stops completely until alternative production develops. Alternative production doesn't exist. Intel's most advanced domestic facilities are 3 to 5 years behind Taiwan capabilities. Samsung's Korean fabs produce different chip architectures. Chinese semiconductor manufacturing remains 7 to 10 years behind TSMC despite massive government investment. When Taiwan production stops, technology companies face immediate obsolescence. Smartphone manufacturers can't source processors. Automotive companies can't build vehicles. Data center operators can't expand capacity. Military contractors can't fulfill defense contracts. But here's what I discovered that makes the timeline particularly urgent. Chinese military modernization specifically targets capabilities needed for Taiwan invasion within 24 to 48 months. People's Liberation Army Navy commissioned 6 new amphibious assault ships in 2024. Chinese Air Force expanded transport aircraft by 340%. Missile forces increased precision strike capabilities by 67%. Military exercises now include full-scale invasion rehearsals every 6 months. Chinese military preparations aren't hypothetical planning. They're systematic capability development for specific operational timeline targeting Taiwan semiconductor facilities. Meanwhile, something disturbing is happening in American semiconductor policy. The CHIPS Act authorized $52 billion for domestic production, but actual spending remains minimal, while administrative requirements prevent rapid facility construction. Environmental reviews require 3 to 7 years before construction begins. Labor union requirements increase costs 40 to 60% above international standards. Regulatory compliance adds 18 to 24 months to project timelines. Bureaucratic processes prevent urgent action while Chinese invasion timeline accelerates. American semiconductor independence requires 10 to 15 years under current regulatory frameworks. Chinese invasion capability exists within 24 to 48 months. The timeline mismatch guarantees semiconductor dependency when geopolitical crisis occurs. But there's something even more disturbing about how this dependency affects military readiness. Pentagon weapons systems depend on Taiwan Semiconductors while planning for potential conflict with China over Taiwan. F-35 fighter jets require chips manufactured in Taiwan. Aegis missile defense systems use Taiwan Semiconductors. Satellite communication networks depend on Taiwan-made processors. American military forces depend on Chinese-controlled territory for weapons functionality. When Chinese invasion begins, American military response requires semiconductors produced in territory under Chinese control. Military effectiveness immediately compromised because weapons depend on enemy-controlled supply chains. The strategic dependency creates impossible military situation where defending Taiwan requires capabilities that depend on Taiwan remaining under democratic control. Military logic becomes circular and self-defeating. Here's what I found that reveals how the economic impact extends far beyond technology companies. Semiconductor shortage affects $4.2 trillion in global economic activity across every sector. Automotive industry lost $180 billion in production during 2021 chip shortage. Healthcare equipment shortages affected 23,000 hospitals globally. Consumer electronics availability dropped 67%. Industrial automation stopped as control systems lacked replacement chips. The 2021 shortage affected only 15% of global semiconductor supply. Taiwan invasion would eliminate 90% of advanced chip production indefinitely. Economic impact 6 to 10 times larger than 2021 disruption with no recovery timeline. But there's an additional factor that makes the crisis uniquely dangerous for financial markets. Technology companies represent 45% of S&P 500 market capitalization while depending entirely on Taiwan semiconductor production. Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, Tesla, and Google combined market cap exceeds $12 trillion. All companies depend on Taiwan chips for core products. When semiconductor supply disappears, technology stock values collapse immediately. Pension funds, 401k accounts, and retirement savings concentrated in technology stocks face catastrophic losses. Index funds tracking S&P 500 lose 40 to 50% of value when technology sector collapses. Retirement security destroyed when semiconductor dependency meets geopolitical reality. Meanwhile, something else is happening that proves institutional investors understand the timeline but refuse to acknowledge it publicly. Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway sold entire Taiwan semiconductor position in Q4 2023 after holding shares for only 3 months. Buffett rarely sells positions quickly unless fundamental problems threaten business viability. TSMC sale suggests legendary investor recognizes geopolitical risks that threaten company survival regardless of business fundamentals. But most institutional investors maintain Taiwan semiconductor exposure while remaining silent about invasion risks. Pension fund managers can't publicly discuss geopolitical vulnerabilities without triggering panic selling that destroys fund performance. Fiduciary responsibilities conflict with risk management when acknowledging threats triggers immediate losses. Fund managers choose silence over prudent risk assessment because honesty destroys short-term performance metrics. I discovered something else that shows how the semiconductor dependency creates cascading failures across interconnected systems. Modern electrical grid depends on computerized control systems using Taiwan semiconductors. Power generation, transmission, and distribution systems require continuous semiconductor replacement for maintenance and upgrades. When Taiwan supply stops, electrical infrastructure begins failing within 1 to 18 months as control systems break without replacement chips. Energy infrastructure failure affects everything dependent on electricity. Water treatment plants stop. Transportation systems fail. Communication networks collapse. Food distribution breaks. Modern civilization depends on electrical systems that depend on Taiwan semiconductors. The dependency creates systematic vulnerability where geopolitical conflict in Taiwan triggers infrastructure collapse globally. Single point of failure affects every aspect of modern life. But here's what makes the timeline particularly dangerous from Chinese strategic perspective. Economic damage to America and Europe from semiconductor shortage serves Chinese geopolitical interests. Chinese invasion of Taiwan would simultaneously eliminate democratic resistance while crippling Western technological capabilities. Economic warfare achieved through geographical conquest of critical manufacturing facilities. China controls domestic semiconductor demand and maintains strategic reserves. Western technology dependence becomes Chinese strategic advantage when Taiwan production stops. Economic vulnerability becomes military weapon. Chinese leadership understands that Taiwan invasion triggers Western economic collapse while strengthening Chinese relative position globally. Geopolitical conflict serves multiple strategic objectives simultaneously. Meanwhile, something else is happening that reveals how rapidly Chinese capabilities are approaching operational readiness. Satellite imagery shows Chinese amphibious forces practicing Taiwan beach assault scenarios monthly. Military analysts estimate Chinese invasion capabilities reach 85% probability of success by early 2026. Weather. Windows for amphibious operations occur in spring and fall annually. Optimal invasion timing approaches within 12 to 24 months. Chinese military modernization follows specific timeline targeting semiconductor facilities with precision strike capabilities. Economic targets prioritized over military objectives because economic damage serves strategic purposes. But there's an additional factor that makes Western response particularly inadequate. European and American semiconductor policies remain focused on long-term development, while Chinese invasion timeline compresses rapidly. Domestic chip manufacturing requires 10 to 15 years for advanced capabilities. Chinese invasion timeline operates on 12 to 24-month horizon. Policy responses designed for peacetime development prove useless for wartime urgency. Emergency semiconductor stockpiling could provide 2 to 3 years of breathing room while domestic capabilities develop. Strategic reserves cost $50 to $100 billion but prevent $4 trillion in economic losses when Taiwan crisis occurs. No Western government maintains strategic semiconductor reserves despite obvious vulnerability to supply disruption. Emergency planning remains theoretical while dependency increases and Chinese capabilities advance. Here's what the systematic failure looks like when Taiwan crisis triggers global technology collapse. Chinese invasion begins with missile strikes on TSMC facilities to prevent technology transfer and eliminate production capabilities. Global technology manufacturing stops within 6 to 12 weeks as semiconductor inventories exhaust. Smartphone production ends. Automotive manufacturing halts. Data center expansion freezes. Military equipment production stops. Stock markets collapse as technology companies face indefinite production shutdown. S&P 500 loses 40 to 60% of value. Pension funds and retirement accounts devastated. Financial crisis spreads globally as technology sector implodes. Infrastructure failures begin within 12 to 18 months as control systems break without replacement chips. Electrical grid instability increases. Transportation networks experience equipment failures. Communication systems degrade as hardware breaks. Economic recession develops into depression as technology-dependent industries stop functioning. Unemployment spikes as automotive, electronics, and information technology sectors eliminate millions of jobs. Recovery requires 10 to 15 years to develop alternative semiconductor manufacturing while rebuilding technological capabilities destroyed by supply chain collapse. Economic damage permanent rather than cyclical. But the most devastating consequence affects national security as military systems lose functionality without replacement semiconductors. Defense readiness collapses as weapons systems break and cannot be repaired. American military superiority disappears when advanced weapons depend on Chinese-controlled semiconductor supply. Global balance of power shifts permanently toward China as Western military capabilities degrade systematically. Smart institutional money recognizes these risks and has been positioning accordingly. That's why Berkshire Hathaway exited Taiwan Semiconductor exposure. That's why private equity avoids technology investments with Taiwan dependencies. Meanwhile, ordinary investors remain completely exposed through index funds, technology stocks, and retirement accounts concentrated in companies that could lose 90% of value when Taiwan crisis eliminates semiconductor supplies. The warning signs are everywhere. Chinese military exercises, accelerating invasion preparations, Western policy inadequacy, business leader silence, institutional investor exits. But the most important signal is mathematical certainty. When 90% of critical technology depends on one island 100 miles from hostile military forces, supply disruption becomes inevitable rather than possible. This isn't about supporting Taiwan independence or opposing Chinese reunification. This is about recognizing that global technological civilization depends on geographically concentrated production, vulnerable to military attack. The dependency was created through decades of economic efficiency optimization that ignored geopolitical risks. The vulnerability cannot be eliminated quickly because semiconductor manufacturing requires extensive time and capital to relocate. I'm not telling you to sell all technology stocks tomorrow. I'm not giving investment advice. What I'm giving you is risk analysis showing that semiconductor dependency creates systematic vulnerability, affecting every aspect of modern life. When 90% of advanced chips come from one island while Chinese invasion capabilities reach operational readiness and Western governments maintain zero strategic reserves, the mathematics of supply disruption become undeniable. The choice isn't whether Taiwan crisis will occur. The choice is whether you understand the implications and prepare accordingly before geopolitical reality forces recognition on everyone simultaneously. What do you think happens when $4 trillion in global technology depends on semiconductor production concentrated in territory 100 miles from Chinese military bases, while Western governments maintain no strategic reserves and no backup production capabilities? The physics of geography meet the mathematics of military conflict regardless of diplomatic preferences or economic convenience.